People gathered in Hermantown today to demand a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. The protest happened just outside Representative Pete Stauber's office, who recently voted to send $14.3 billion to Israel. That bill was approved by the House with a vote of 226 to 196. Today's event was organized by Jewish community members. They say not all Jewish people support Israel, but that doesn't make them any less Jewish.
People like Pete Stauber, in his statements, have said that if you stand up against what the Israeli state, the Israeli government is doing, then you're anti-Semitic. And we as Jewish people here today are living proof that that's not true.
And one by one, protesters placed stones in front of Stauber's door. The stones mirror a traditional Jewish practice in which rocks, rather than flowers, are placed on top of a person's grave. Attendees, some Jewish, some Muslim, and some of neither faith, joined together in song and prayer. The goal was to honor the lives lost in the Israel-Hamas war and to inspire change in the U.S. support of Israel. And we reached out to Representative Stauber's office for a comment on the protest, but did not hear back by the time of this newscast. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told families of hostages that he is marching with them and vowed to continue going after Hamas militants in his latest